when you start, what constitutes success is shared by everybody. But as you go on, you don't have these regular check-ins with people because you're all running, pursuing your own path. And all of a sudden you realize somebody's off in the distance somewhere and you haven't checked in as far as whether the metrics have changed.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And I'm Julie.
Wait.
That's
What? Exactly.
No, so this is a very exciting day for us. Much delayed. But back in September, we had a contest to see who would join us as a third guest. It's not really a guest. It's a third person in our conversation.
Was this our birthday contest?
It was our birthday contest, which was a full almost 6 months ago. But
so our next birthday contest is coming up in just a few months.
Just about. So welcome, Julie Gabrielli. In just a minute, you're going to hear a great story that Julie has about running, that we got into all sorts of things about like pacing and sales cycles and knowing when to like push harder and when to ebb and flow, as well as a couple other really important kind of motivation and inspiration parts of business.
Very cool story.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I did want to mention that we are on the quivering edge of 50 people in our podcast community on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So we're waiting for that 50th
So we're at 49.
person. We're at 49.
49.
We are waiting for that 50th person
because we have two people to welcome who have answered the call of my not guilt version that I laid down last night.
No guilt. No.
Allie Weatherhold joined us, as well as Lindsay Carlson.
Yes.
And I did hear from somebody last week who, because I mentioned that people had clicked through, I could see the data they clicked through, but then they hadn't asked to join. And I actually heard from someone, she said, I was one of the ones who clicked through, and she said something I'd never thought of. She said, I just didn't feel ready to join the group yet until I'd caught up on past episodes. And it's so interesting to me.
Quiz.
There's no quiz.
No.
There's no like hoops you have to jump through. It is just simply a place where we can talk and chat. So if you have that concern or some other concern, please just hop on in, pull up a chair.
Right. The only thing that happens is we welcome you on the podcast.
Speaking of welcome Julie Gabrielli one more time.
Thank you.
And let's get on with your story.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. So here's my story. I started running about 1.5 years ago, training for events and things. And I did not like running. In fact, sometimes today I still...
Wait, so you weren't a runner before that?
No.
Okay.
I do other things. I used to bike a lot, but then I had a kid and didn't have any time. So I thought I'd start running because it's easy to do and doesn't require a lot of equipment or a gym membership. So I can hear
the excitement. I can hear the excitement.
Right?
You loved running.
So I joined this training group. And in the first meeting, I said, I don't like running. And they were like, good, I'm glad you're here. It's like, okay, fine. And these groups are really great. They're through this local business called Charm City Run. Mm-hmm. They have 6 stores, one in Timonium, one in Annapolis, Frederick, all around the area. And they didn't pay me to say this, but they have it figured out because they have these coaching groups at every store. And sometimes all the coaching groups will meet up at like the Locust Point store and do a run from there.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
then they have like big discounts and like they know how to do brand loyalty big time.
Yeah. And like a sense of community and like you're part of something.
Yeah. Cool. It's really fun. So I got a couple events under my belt and I decided
kind of
events. I did a 5-mile run 2 Decembers ago, not this past one, but the one before. It's called the Celtic Solstice, and it's in Druid Hill Park. Mm-hmm. And it's really fun, and you get cookies afterwards.
Well, that makes it all worthwhile.
Right. If there's cookies or beer at the end, like that seems to make it all worth it.
Yeah, it's great.
So you started off somewhat small.
Small, yeah. To me, that was, again, like at this point, every event that I did was the most distance I'd ever run.
Yay,
so, right.
100 feet. Woohoo!
So at the beginning of the year, I was training for the race that they run in March or April, I think, called Soul of the City, spelled SOLE.
Sure.
And it's a 10K, which is around a little over 6 miles. So again, like next one is longer. But when I got to that one, I thought, all right, what am I going to do next? Still not sure I even liked running, but I decided I loved the sound of the Charles Street 12, which is a really marquee event for this organization. And they run it on September 1st. It's always the first Saturday in September. And it's 12 miles through the heart of the city, starting in Towson, and you get yourself on Charles Street, and you just run all the way to Locust Point.
Wow.
Where they have a big party at Under Armour's headquarters.
That's awesome.
Cool.
And for those people, for those of our listeners who aren't from Baltimore, if you imagine Baltimore like a clock, Charles Street pretty much goes straight down the center from like 12 o'clock to sort of 6, kind of.
And it goes through all these great neighborhoods, and especially through the downtown, there are all these monuments and just beautiful buildings. And so it was, I'm just fond of Charles Street anyway. So I thought, well, what that meant though was that I had to train for 3 months in the summer. And I've never run in the heat before.
It's totally different.
I wasn't a runner. So you have to figure out hydration and nutrition, quote unquote, so you don't, die on these runs. And so the first thing you did with that group, though, is you figure out what your pace is. And these are all all these technical things that I had no idea about with running. Right. But you do 2 miles on a track, kind of as fast as you can without slowing way down the second mile. And then you figure out whatever your mile is from those, that's your pace.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
And then you have to go on to this website called the Macmillan Run Calculator. And you kind of enter in what your goal is and what your fitness level is. And your mile is this. So you look on this chart and it tells you if you're going to run 12-mile race or a half marathon or a 10K or whatever it is, this is your goal.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I know. It's kind of technical.
So you don't, because I guess it makes sense. I've never really thought this through. If I'm going to run 1 or 2 miles, it's very different pace than if I need to run 12. I can't do my maximum pace for 12.
And to even know what your pace even is. I never realized you had to figure that out.
I guarantee you I would overshoot. This explains why I can't run long distances, because I always think I can go faster than I can. And I completely blow it in the first periods.
It's very common, and that's what the coaches are there for. So when I went on that calculator, it told me that my pace was going to be, and okay, here's where I'm a little self-conscious, because if you have any runners listening, they're going to roll their eyes at how incredibly slow I am, but 11 and a half minutes per mile.
Yeah, that's actually pretty fast for
over
me.
A 12 mile.
Well, over a 12 mile.
Yeah.
I mean, my husband is like a 7. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, you can't compare to that.
Are you still talking about pace? Because otherwise there are issues.
No, he's a 10.
Okay.
Yeah, he runs a 7-minute mile or 7 and change, 7:10, something like that.
Okay, well, he's not invited on the show, but
no, thank you. So 11:30, I'm like, okay, whatever. So every week there's a track workout on Tuesday night and then a distance run on Saturday morning starting at 6 a.m.
Ouch.
Because it's hot otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and every Saturday we add a mile. So every Saturday in the summer was the longest I'd ever run. It was kind of cool, hit all those milestones. But my pace on those runs, and you're not supposed to be going flat out, you're just supposed to know that you can finish, was 12 and a half minutes per mile. So that's a lot slower.
Yeah.
And so based on that, here comes the Charles Street 12. And I'm totally psyched. These events are actually really, really fun.
Yeah.
And it turned out I had a friend from the training group who was my same pace. So we decided we were going to run together.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 4 miles are predominantly uphill. So the last thing you want to do is spend it all there because you got 8 more to go after that. Yeah. So we just went slow. We got to the end of those 4 miles and we're like, oh, that was it? It was fun. It was easy. We got our water break, whatever. And honestly, my goal was to have fun and finish. Those are my 2 goals. I never thought about my pace because I just have this crappy free app on my phone. And, that's in my pocket. So I'm not too worried about it. So I get to the finish line. Well, the last 2 miles actually were really hard. It was just hard.
Yeah.
I was tired. And one of the coaches was on Key Highway, which is probably a half mile to go, just cheering everybody on. And I can't tell you, that gave me so much energy, just that vibe.
Well, he knew that last half mile is when you're maybe I'll just stop.
So I get to the finish line and I'm super glad to be done. And I pull out my app and my pace was 11 minutes and 30 seconds a mile.
Wow.
I mean,
pretty cool.
It was exact.
Huh.
And so, needless to say, I started weeping. I was amazed. Well, I didn't think about the pace.
Yep. There's 22 things I want to, I don't know about you, Elliot, but there's a lot of things that I want to hit on. One of my favorites though is because I know you, so I know you're training for a half, is it half marathon now? A half marathon. Yeah. So
Which sounds like a lot. It's 13 miles. Okay. Like, let's
back up for a second. I saw a comedian one time talking about that 13 miles shouldn't be a half anything. That like it should be its own thing.
It should be a full 13.1. 13.1.
I loathe running, and I've tried to sidle up to it and make peace with it more than a few times, and I just can't find my inner runner. So I really, really identify with this story. But so maybe that's why this part of it fascinates me. But as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, if Charm City came out of the gate trying to sell you on a half marathon, or even the Charles Street 12, you never would have walked through the door. You wouldn't have signed up. Right. You wouldn't have done it. So this, the one of the most direct business metaphors here to me is like the sales cycle. We so badly want to sell people sometimes into like the big thing. And yet there's this sort of like, flirting's not quite the way to say it, but like this gradual process of
getting used to the water,
getting somebody to just try a little thing. Like, can you even running the track is a big step for somebody who hates running as much as I think you and I
have to ask them when they tell us the workout. I still have to say, okay, so how many times around is a mile? I don't know.
Yeah,
it's 4.
Yeah. But it's intimidating if you were told to start. Well, why don't you just do 19 times around the track and give your average?
Right.
Then you're just going home.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't know if I can make it around once, basically.
Well, that awareness of what it takes to just get people started, get them in the door and say yes to something, anything. I talk to entrepreneurs all the time who I feel like really struggle with this thought that they want to sell Z, but they haven't really given much thought to what is the A that somebody might easily, I won't say a no-brainer, say yes to, but that doesn't take hardly any thought to say yes to something so that they can get a taste, especially if you offer something that's a little bit off the cuff, a little bit unusual, a little bit maybe done differently. You have to be willing to meet them where they are and give them something they can say yes to, and then enroll them in whether it's a sense of community or whether it's like getting excited. Because I still don't hear it's like some part of you that's like madly in love with running.
Yeah, I don't think about it all the time. I'll tell you that. I like it a lot more than I used to, though.
Yeah.
I don't look forward to going out to the track when it's 30 degrees and there's snow on the ground.
Did you keep pace? You said there was one person that ran your same pace.
Yeah.
And you stayed with that person throughout the 4 miles uphill.
On that particular run, yeah.
So you kept pace with him or her?
Her
throughout the same 12 miles.
Yeah.
And see, where I went was, it seems to me that it would have psychologically, for me anyway, made it so much easier that there's someone at my level, someone that I could keep pace with. Mm-hmm. And I value that when I take a look at business. I value that in terms of whether you call it peer advisory or whether you talk to, we've talked on the show a lot about people to talk to about where you are, not just your employees, not people who, if I had a conversation weekly with Bill Gates, it's not really going to help me run my law firm. I mean, it may help in other things, but it may be LinkedIn followers, but it's not going to help me run my law firm. But if I have somebody who's largely in my pace or my area or understands my issues, it makes it easier to keep pace and for some accountability. And I was wondering whether you felt what impact you felt that person running with you had.
That makes a lot of sense, especially for that being my first long race. It meant everything to me because running is kind of lonely. I mean, I am an extrovert. I'll admit it, but we just had fun too. Like we were laughing and talking. And afterwards, when I told my husband that, he said, "You were talking. Then you should have run faster because you shouldn't be able to talk."
That was the first thing that occurred to me because that's what I was told. If you can talk while you're running, you oughta,
But for that, I didn't have the confidence, right? And we were both kind of beginners. We were at the same level. Yeah, there was a whole lot to recommend it. Absolutely.
Well, to me, I think what's important there is being really clear on what your goal is. Your goal wasn't to knock out a personal record of time. Like you weren't trying to run the fastest 12 miles you could ever run. You were trying to run 12 miles, which you'd never run before. Right. So any amount of finishing is exciting. And I think goals have sort of a critical path. And I do think a lot is if you had also tried to run fast for your first 12 miles, you probably would have pooped out somewhere along the way.
That's a classic.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened. The first 5K I ever ran with the running group, I foolishly, because I hadn't heard your story yet, I decided to run with this woman who I knew ran a little faster than me because I thought that would motivate me.
Raise your game.
Also not knowing that people tend to accidentally run faster in races. And we got around the first where the guys like read you your pace because it's the first mile. And I too am like an 11 and a half, maybe 12-minute mile. Like that's as fast as I've ever gotten. We were going like just under 9-minute mile. And I'm like, oh, that's why my lungs feel like they're going to explode inside my chest. And I was like, move along. I'm going to hold back. But I ended up having to walk several times because of it. And so that pacing, especially in business, it's why we've done a few episodes where this has come up. I get a little frustrated with if you're not growing, you're dying, kind of not appreciating the nuance of their ebbs and flows to everything, and knowing your pace, knowing what's important, knowing what stake you're trying to claim at the moment, because if what you need in your business is growth, that's one thing. But a lot of times, if you actually ask somebody a couple questions, what they really need is profitability. And that doesn't go with growth, or they just need to stabilize some crazy drama that's been going on, or they need, there are different kinds of goals, and they need different kinds of pace.
They do. And it's also a matter to me of syncing up your needs. I mean, for example, the person you were running with, I would suspect she was not trying to set the world record either. Her goals, my guess is that her goals were similar to yours, which is finish, hit her pace. And that meant because she wasn't necessarily trying to beat you, your victory was not her defeat, or vice versa. Her victory, so you weren't trying to edge them out. So a lot of times, whether it's within your organization or the people that you're talking to, making sure the goals are in sync, is an extremely important part of this process. Because if your goals aren't, if her goal was to win, then she's not a good partner for you at that point, because the time is not a metric that you were really caring about as your primary. You wanted to hit your pace, but it wasn't a competitive issue for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's another element of that too, because I'm remembering that in the last mile, we didn't stay together because we're individuals. We had the same goal, and we helped each other get to mile 7 or whatever. But at that point, we're like, I'm going to go a little faster. Okay.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. No, that is, I was going to run with somebody. I did a warrior dash, which is one of those, mud climb, you run a little bit and then there's an obstacle, which is great for me because it really not limits the running, because you still end up running a 5K, but you get to pause and like do a thing and then run. So it's like short spurts of running, and you get all filthy dirty and it's fun. I will have to say though, while there is beer at the end, the real thing I was most excited about was you get this like warrior Viking hat thing at the end.
Well, sure.
Well, yeah, no, that's the exciting part, except because I have such a giant noggin, like mine fit me like a beanie. It was like a yarmulke on my head. Yeah, no, it was very, very upsetting.
That
and it didn't have any stretch to it.
You haven't worn it in here while recording.
They don't have different sizes?
No, and it didn't have any stretch to it. I'm still a little scarred.
Is that historically accurate? The Vikings didn't have different sizes?
I'm sure they
must
did.
have had smaller heads because that was
probably,
long
probably. But I digress. And there was someone I was going to run with, and I did not make a conscious decision to pull away from her, but I just got so excited about I was like running this, and all of a sudden I looked back and she was gone, but I wasn't sure if maybe she had pulled away from me or if I had pulled away from her. We kind of got lost, and you had to wait sometimes for the obstacles, and that's where we sort of parted ways. And then I just took off, and we get to the end, and she goes, "Where did you go? I just looked up and you were off in the distance," and I felt so bad, but we hadn't had that sort of agreement, but I could feel it. I was feeling motivated to go a little faster. And so that could bring up a whole piece of the importance of just conversation and transparency about okay, now I want to go faster and you want to hang here.
Well, but that's the communication, and that's what separates, because the race at its core is going to be an individual endeavor. It's going to be an individual achievement. You can pair up with people in order to accomplish your individual achievement. Where I think it departs somewhat from a business analogy is that the business is going to achieve something mostly as a group, internally, which means that where I think dysfunction and a loss of of culture and absence of culture occurs is when there's not that communication and somebody pulls far ahead, or they're going in a different direction, or their metric has all of a sudden changed in what constitutes success. Whereas when they start, and this is what I see in my world, when you start, what constitutes success is shared by everybody. But as you go on, you don't have these regular check-ins with people because you're all running, pursuing your own path. And all of a sudden you realize somebody's off in the distance somewhere and you haven't checked in as far as whether the metrics have changed.
Yeah, exactly. There's one other piece of the story that I think is super important, and that is the coach in the last half mile. That to me feels so important, both if I think of it in terms, and we have touched on this before in a previous episode, of if we sort of think of you as the client or the customer in the experience, of knowing where a client or a customer might be fatiguing or flagging and need a little reassurance. We've talked about the emotional experience of a customer in the work that you do, but also for your team members. Like, where does it start to feel like, or, your team that works for you as a leader, where are your people feeling the weight of what they're up against, and where do they need that sort of cheering along in the last half mile? I've experienced that, like that last little bit of time where you just really need something from somewhere because you're out.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the pairing, because the first thing that you were pointed out in your story, and Jody had touched on it somewhat as well, was the program that they started. You're getting used to the water. They got you used to the water by showing you how this would work. But did you buy into that immediately? Your McCormick calculator, or whatever it was.
Macmillan.
It was a mix something.
Yeah.
And I knew it wasn't a McNugget or a McBurger. Yeah. But so, getting your pace, just the routine, the workouts that they would give you, et cetera. Did you buy in right away, or did they have to convince you that, no, we really know what we're talking about and this is how to do it?
I mean, I'm one of these people, if I'm going to sign up for something, I just trust the people that I've just paid, not a lot of money, but, like, I'm going to do what they tell me. Because I think that was the other thing that I was thinking about this in terms of business, is like trusting the coach, or trusting the expert. And just sort of like, you paid the money, follow the program, do what they say.
But how did you come to that? I mean, because then you walked in, it seems to me that you walked in there at a point where they had already established some level of credibility with you.
Oh, actually, word of mouth. There it is, because my husband was already in. He had done a marathon training group for the Baltimore Marathon. And he talked about how fun it was, that it was like this whole team spirit thing, and also that the workouts were really good. And then he ran that and had a good experience. And so then he was like a believer. So he was the one that told me about it. So I think they rely a lot on this kind of word of mouth. I mean, of course they advertise like any business, but
right. But that really shortens their onboarding process.
Yeah,
really, because you walk in and you're like, I know what you're about. I know that it works. Right. I know you guys are the expert. Yeah. I know what it costs, or kind of what it costs. And I'm ready, just let's move forward. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of businesses have, whether for customers or employees, is whether their onboarding process is proportional to where the customer is when they walk in the door.
Right. Well, and I think there's also something, it comes back to that thought process of making it safe to test out the water. Somebody like your husband who runs a 7-minute mile, he's going to be looking for something, I would assume his criteria are kind of like pushing and competitive and like what will get me the fastest or whatever. Whenever I have ended up going down a path that I wasn't even aiming for, where I ended up like my strong woman competition kind of thing. Like I would have never, ever signed up for a strong woman competition. But there was something in the beginning that had a sense of stretching my goals and capability. And it always also had some sense of camaraderie or like group support. It was like, there's this magic mix of like competitivism, but with support. And even the strong woman competition itself, the only reason I even said yes to that at the end of this, much like it was a very gradual process of like one little thing I signed up for that then, well, hey, why don't you do this other little thing?
Because you've made friends by then.
Because I made friends and it felt very supportive. And even that particular strong woman competition is a fundraiser. And it's fascinating because you feel this intense competitiveness to do your best. And yet everyone is supporting each other. Somebody who's on another team would be like, hey, try your grip this way so there is something about that safe. Like I would have never entered a purely cutthroat competitive because it was a new stretch for me.
Yeah.
So that sort of magic of stretching and safety, I think, is also kind of a fascinating thing.
Well, and when you talk about the support, and this is one thing that you didn't go into a lot in your story because you were talking about the beginning and the end, but it gets back to one of my pet peeves. I know it's Jody's pet peeves in the business world, which is we'll do a personnel evaluation at the end of the year. It's an annual evaluation. And the way I see it translated here is that it seems to me that in order for you to get from point A, which is walking in the door, and point B to finishing up the Charles Street 12, you have a series of check-ins. You're not absent from them for a while. You have workouts. You have whether in person or on your own time, so they can check your progress throughout.
Well, and every Saturday, there's the sense of like, can I go another mile? Like, how's this going?
Right. And so there's a way to, by the time you get to the event that you're training for, it would seem you have this sense you've already put the work in, and not only have you put the work in, but there's been a system where everybody knows that they've checked in. They didn't really let you slack. And what I see in business a lot of times is, you know what? You made a mistake in February. We're going to talk about that in December in our annual evaluation.
Right.
And as opposed to this continuing level of appropriate support where you have some things on your own, some things checking in.
And feedback. Because I love that you brought this up, because you talked about it being right on 11:30, almost with a certain air of sort of like magically it was. Well, but I don't know that it was, to your point, Elliot, that I think that over the course of however long this training program was, the every Saturday thing, you were kind of weaving that into some sort of internal clock. Not that you can magically pace your self without looking at a thing. That's not really my point. But I have to believe that the gradual, consistent feedback was training something in you to kind of have a sense of what your regular pace is. Not that you could have always nailed it right at 11:30, but you weren't going to accidentally run a 9.5 minute or probably even accidentally do 16 or 17 minutes. You had some
you do start
sense
to know what it feels like.
Yeah. And I don't think for the whole performance review thing, if you hadn't been having that feedback along the training process to just start you off, have you do a bunch of running and then clock you at the end of the run and be like, sorry, you missed it. That you're missing the opportunity.
Or even that it would have been likely that, hey, we didn't talk to you for like 8 months, but congratulations, you hit it right on the nose. That just does not happen.
No.
And if it does, you don't really know how you would ever duplicate it again. You don't know how you would do it again.
Exactly. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.